All right. Well, we're gonna talk a little recruiting, and then we're gonna talk a little Nebraska, and then we're gonna talk a little Northwestern, which Crash is gonna have to carry me on the Northwestern part. I really haven't paid any attention to what they're doing this year. But anyway, I'm Scott Schrader, and we got
Crashlet Collier.
so the recruiting part again, the class of 2026, USC is pretty much done. It's at the point now where it could end up going more than one more guy being added to the 2026 recruiting class. But KJ Ford, a four-star top 100 edge, committed to Florida, is pretty much the last guy USC's focused on. So he's going to be coming in for a visit for the UCLA game, and that's obviously right before the signing period. So USC's in a pretty good spot for him right now. I'm going to go see him play tomorrow night. Duncanville plays Cedar Hill. I'm actually in Duncanville right now. And last weekend, I saw Jamion Winfield, a four-star defensive tackle from Richardson, Texas, which is about 20, 25 minutes from Dallas Airport, northeast. And I'll tell you what, this was a guy that committed to USC back in March. Really have heard nothing about him he took no trips. We've heard little about him wavering on his commitment. He told me after the game last Friday that he is rock solid for USC. He's talking to nobody else but the Trojans. He will be at USC for the Northwestern game and the UCLA game. So anyway, this is if there's a better interior defensive lineman than Jamion Winfield, I have not seen him yet. I'm not saying he's better than Richard Anderson and James Johnson and guys that I haven't seen those guys in pads, but I've seen those guys in camp settings. And I'll tell you, Jamion Winfield's athleticism, explosiveness, just crazy first step, and his personality. That's the part that I get when I go see these guys in person. I get kind of an idea what their personality is like. This guy is going to fit in beautifully at USC with some of the younger defensive linemen that USC's brought in the last couple of years. So anyway, I was really happy to be able to see him play. And that's another big pair him up with Tom Tapui and Braden Jones, Malik Brooks, and the guys that are going to be on the ends like Samote, Katoanya, and other guys that they have coming in this recruiting class, like Luke Wafel, who I saw a couple of weeks ago. There's a lot to look forward to at USC with this 2026 recruiting class coming in. So we'll move on now. This weekend, Luke Wafel's coming out for the visit for the Friday night Northwestern game. There'll be some local guys, the Trinity League, some of the other schools like Mission Viejo, Sierra Canyon. They all have this week off. So those guys, I know Madden Reardon, Brandon Lockhart, and the guys from Tron Baker and the guys from Sierra Canyon will also be at the Coliseum, among others. I'm sure some modern day guys in Bosco, kids like Joshua Hall. And so we'll move on now and talk about the Nebraska game. Anybody that's been to Nebraska, whether it was for a USC game or any other team that was playing, realizes that fan base is just a little bit different than others. Some of the most welcoming, humble, just genuinely nice people are located in the state of Nebraska. And just talk about your first, your experience that you had with even Nebraska fans at the Coliseum last year, Crash.
So Matt, I just ended up just from a couple volleyball parents last year from whose kids are at USC. A bunch of them, obviously, because Nebraska was in, they were like, all right, we're gonna throw a tailgate for this. So I got invited to that. And then they invited their extended friends too, who weren't even, had kids on the team who just wanted to come out to SoCal for the weekend. And they were just super welcoming, super nice. Obviously, we were, bantering a little bit about the game, but it was all in good fun. Like genuinely just great people. And that's just what you can tell about this fan base. And obviously, so I knew that if I had ended up going to that game, which I didn't, I would have been, very welcomed as well. Obviously, I'm sure there's obviously all the friendly banter, but it doesn't seem like their fan base that's, there's like no one who's going to want your blood at any point during the game. I've generally gotten lucky and been around very welcoming fans. Maybe that's because I've often been with a friend or a relative who goes to that school or went to that school, so maybe that's helped me a little bit. But there's always at least one interaction you've had with at least one or two fans who just are like, I want your blood. But they don't say it quite like that, but it's basically like they do. That's
Yeah.
not the case with Nebraska from my experience last year. So anyone I've talked to there, just I knew that you're just going to be super welcome there. So I hope to
Yeah.
one day get a chance to go to their game to a game there.
So USC goes to Nebraska, night game, little on the cold side, blackout game, crowd's going crazy. So USC goes into a pretty hostile environment, and Jaden Mayava has probably his worst. Yes, he had some moments last year that weren't all that great, but he had his worst game of the year without question against Nebraska. And USC still pulls out a victory, although it was a semi nail biter there for a stretch. It looked like USC probably the first half was on their way to another road loss. So where I start with this game is you look at the positives. There's enough people that want to look at the negatives, and it was a road victory in a tough environment. You talk to coaches, I know coaches at all kinds of schools, whether the SEC, the ACC, the Big Ten, and they talk about all road games are hard. And fans can go, oh, but USC's got a better roster. Just go look at some of the games over the years of these teams that have even won national championships. And they had their games on the road that were nail biters against teams that they were far, far more talented than. So just what did you see from USC that maybe was disappointing? And maybe what did you see from USC that was encouraging?
Well, I think what was definitely tough was especially that first half USC did start out slow. And then obviously one thing, Scott, you do have to consider with kind of just these these last four games, ever since USC started with Illinois, Michigan, Notre Dame, and now Nebraska, is from those first four games to the last four of the season, it's been a definitely an increase in competition. USC has been facing better teams over the last four games. So obviously, I'm not trying to make excuses for anyone, but you naturally are going to expect guys aren't going to, have their best games necessarily because they're facing better players. And I think that was very much the case for guys like Jade Mayava, Makai Lemon, Jacoby Lane. Obviously, hurts not having Wayman Jordan and Eli Sanders. But I think what really stood out to me was just the grittiness of this team that they found a way to get done. That might have been a pretty ugly win, but I'll take it because you know what? They just did not give up. And I think that first half looked ugly, but I was definitely impressed with how they settled in and did like that they did have Jade Mayav actually run the ball a bit more. That's been something I've been wanting to see for a while, especially since Jordan and Sanders went out.
Yeah, I think that's going to be key going forward too in the games they have remaining on their schedule is for Jaden to be that option for sure. And yeah, USC was down to their third and fourth string running backs. The shuffling of the offensive line has just been amazing. What Zach Hansen has been able to do. You did have Elijah Page that came back for this game, but immediately you've got Killian O'Connor out, and you lose a guard.
Alani Noah
Uh,
went down.
yeah, and Alani Noah, and so it's just they keep putting in guys and they just keep going, and I think that's very impressive. I think when you talked about the grittiness of this football team. Look, the fact of the matter is, whether USC lost 6 games last year or not, and coming into this season, USC has been competitive and had a chance to win basically every game they played in the last 2 years, except Notre Dame. Both Notre Dame games were pretty. Even that last game, we could argue was winnable, but we'll put that in a separate category because they didn't come from ahead to lose. Okay, but I think it's just overall, I think the defense got better. I think you're looking at the secondary has vastly improved over the last 3 weeks. And if you can continue to get pressure from the defensive line, I think USC is going to be in good shape where they play. You're going to have to go to Oregon, and you're going to have to play some disciplined football. But the things that kind of stood out still, and I think there's fewer than there were, is the personal foul penalties. Whether it's taunting on the sideline, Nebraska's sideline after a huge play by Bishop Fitzgerald, you get penalized 15 yards instead of Nebraska having second and 16. That's the kind of stuff they need to clean up. But the Nebraska game again, I just think every win going forward by 1 point is considered a great victory. So, and there's not going to be fans that are going to look at it that way, but I certainly am going to. And I don't know that much about Northwestern, what they're going to be facing, but have you seen anything from them you're able to offer up on what your thoughts are heading into Friday night's game?
So, Scott, I've been talking a little bit about this week, gotten a chance to kind of just scout a little bit. Obviously, one thing I did I would kind of argue with this team before I kind of get into a bit of the personnel is even as badly as Northwestern handled the whole Pat Fitzgerald scandal controversy and all that with how they suspended him, then fired him. I'd argue, just considering how he done, I'm not trying to put any disrespect to him. Obviously, he played at Northwestern, was coached there for a while, had some good teams, but just kind of how the things were going, it seemed like just even just moving on from him, even just in the fashion they did, and just elevating David Braun to the full-time position of head coach. I think it's just brought a new spark to his team because I would argue they're not quite as good as Nebraska, but
Yeah.
they're still a good team. I would argue they're 5-3, they're competitive, and I think it's a good opportunity for USC to regain their confidence. And I think obviously you're looking at a quarterback like Preston Stone, who I don't think is very good, but could still I think it's a good test for USC's defense to just be like, all right, here's how we stop their run game. Don't lay busted plays in the secondary. One thing that does concern me is just as reports have emerged that Jamal Jarrett's going to be out, and obviously he's been, very effective. I've been really impressed with him so far. Obviously, the other area I'm hoping, obviously, the linebackers do better too, especially helping against the run game, because that's been some areas in the last few games where I've been concerned. And I mean, I talked about this on the Voice of College Football over the past couple weeks, and we've been arguing that is Rob Ryan possibly coaching for his job? Obviously, I mean, I'm not trying to go against any of Ryan's, credentials and accomplishments as a coach, but just this linebacker room has sometimes struggled at times, and it seems like that could be an area, especially with just how much Ryan has said he'd be able to utilize Eric Gentry. And you could argue last year, Matt Entz, who didn't have Gentry, was really able to, get more out of his linebackers room. So I'm just really interested to see just how USC performs against this Northwestern offense. It should not be as solid as Nebraska's. And then on the defensive side, I think this is an opportunity for USC to just regain confidence, especially from guys like Jaden Mayava, King Miller, Makai Lemon, who maybe haven't been playing quite as well as they have over the last few games.
Yeah. Well, they're 14 and a half point, at least they were when I looked the other day, favorite over Northwestern. Yeah, yeah. If you go look at Northwestern, it's just like Purdue. Purdue's lost most of their games, and Northwestern's won more than they've lost. But both those teams are vastly improved. And if you look at some of these teams, if they have one of those games where they put everything together, and it's going to be like their Super Bowl come to the Coliseum until their next game, but they're going to be up for it. I would imagine that unless USC helps out quite a bit with some penalties and turnovers, they're probably going to move on from this game with a victory. But yeah, you have to take all these games seriously, and those guys on defense are going to have to step up for sure. What I'm curious to see is, are we going to see more of Carlin Jones? That one play at Nebraska, it's just like that was the first interior defensive lineman that a running back had met at the line of scrimmage that was just kind of like did not budge or move. And that when you start seeing that type of stuff happen with USC's defensive line, that's when you're really sure they're going in the right direction. Carlin hasn't had a chance to play. He's been battling nagging injuries since he got to USC a couple of years ago. So if he starts playing a little bit more, that might be a big deal by the time they get to Oregon in a little less than 3 weeks. So all right, well, Friday night game a little bit different. Won't be many recruits. Won't be much tailgating. What do you got planned pre-game?
I tailgate with my parents, my brother at his frat ZBT, and then head to the game. So excited for that. And then really what I want to see out of this game once I get to the Coliseum is I want to see USC start fast and not have a slow start like they did against Nebraska. Not so much for this game necessarily, but because it just sets the tone for the remainder of the schedule. In which games you got three tough games coming up: Iowa, who's got great defense; Oregon, who's just great all around; and UCLA, because well, it's UCLA and it's the rivalry, and there's just obviously the battle for the victory bell. So starting strong this game, I think, is crucial because of the message that it just sets for the rest of the season for this team.
All right. So what do you think about where USC's ranked in the playoff poll at 19?
I think it's about right. Obviously, I think a lot needs to go right for them. But really, I think it's a good place. But it also, they're kind of in company with a lot of, especially teams with their Big Ten peers as well as other teams that are 6-2 or like 7-2 right now. So I think it's good placement, but obviously opportunities move up. And one thing that struck me was Iowa making the CFP. So even if they beat Oregon or play them close, that now turns into a quality win in the eyes of the CFP committee. So I'm really thinking that I really want to see Iowa play hope possibly win, I think benefits USC because then it obviously, makes the game with Oregon more interesting, basically into a play-in game essentially. But also, even if the Hawkeyes lose, but it's close, it then they will likely, I'd imagine, stay in the CFP rankings, and then USC beating them makes it look much more impressive in the eyes of the committee. So I think it's
Yeah,
all right, but obviously I think a lot's going to need to go right for the Trojans. But really, the big thing they got to do is they got to control what they can control and win their last 4 games.
sure. They won their last 4 games and are in the playoffs. Period. The end. I mean, there's like zero doubt about that part. Um, you go up to Eugene and you beat them. Now you're the third place team in the Big Ten, and they're not taking 2 teams from the Big Ten for the playoffs. They're definitely going to take 3. So yeah, there's really not a scenario I can envision where USC doesn't make the playoffs if they go 4-0 to finish the season. But it's a big if having to go up to Eugene and play the Ducks up there. But at the same time, I don't know how well we know the Oregon football team. The 2 teams that they played with a winning record are Montana State and I think this Northwestern team. So every other team that Oregon has played this season and lost to, I mean, and beaten has a winning record. They lost 30 to 20 to Indiana at home. So yeah, we'll see. Now Oregon's going to be tough. Oregon's even when they're not that good, it's tough to beat up in Eugene. So, um, but yeah, if USC manages to go 9-3 and finishes the regular season at 9-3, I consider that a good season for USC. I know there's a lot of people that don't. But I think they can go and finish the season winning 10 games with a bowl game, which are a lot harder to win now than they used to be because guys sit out with their draft status and so on. But was there a game though that we'll finish with this? Was there a game this past weekend that you watched that really stood out to you?
One team that's kind of just been catching my eye recently has been Vanderbilt. I've kind of just been like, during the off week last week, I watched the entire Vanderbilt Missouri game, and then watched them again when they went to Texas. And thought that game was really interesting. I think just like what's been happening, it just shows kind of just in this NIL transfer portal era that if you can just get the right players who especially may either want that opportunity at the top of college football and you compensate them well enough, you can put together a good team relatively quickly. So it's been very interesting to see the rebuild that Clark Lee has done. And then also on the topic of Clark Lee, it's going to be interesting to see, does he get offered one of these jobs that's gonna top jobs that have opened up in recent weeks, especially with Hugh Freeze at Auburn being the latest coach to be fired. So a lot of casualties this year, crazy coaching carousel. So I'm curious, does he stay at his alma mater, or does he, depending on obviously the compensation will for sure factor in, but does he leave for one of those jobs, and then who takes his place too? I mean,
Yeah,
I'm even saying like even people are saying like, what if Clark Lee goes to Penn State? Does that mean Vanderbilt brings back James Franklin? And I mean, James Franklin is still involved in the Vanderbilt community a little bit. I mean, he's still active at baseball games. He's good friends with Tim Corbin. He was in the dugout of the SEC championship game last year.
yeah.
So it's just very interesting to just see like, do they try to bring him back? Although, but then again, sometimes those second reunions don't always work out the way that either party is hoping. So,
Yeah.
but it's just because of just the story of Vanderbilt with Diego Pavia and obviously the lawsuit. It's been very interesting to just follow this Vanderbilt team, especially ever since they beat then number one Alabama last year.
Yeah. Yeah, there were some really good football games. I have to tip my cap to Oklahoma for going up to Knoxville and taking down the Tennessee Vols. That was kind of a game that stood out for me. It looked like Tennessee was going to win that football game, and then I'll tell you, Oklahoma really nutted up there at the end and came through and beat them. But I'll tell you that Oklahoma's still got a tough final, I think, 3 game stretch. So it's going to be interesting to see, if that's yet another football program looking for a head coach in a few weeks down the road. So, all right, well, hey, good talking to you. We'll get back and do this for a few more weeks until the season's over with. We'll have a little recap of this game and some more recruiting stuff. There'll be some 2027 recruiting stuff that's going to be coming up. We just added Greg Biggins to the Rivals recruiting team, so hopefully we can start getting Greg Biggins on. We'll start doing some recruiting stuff with him as we get down to the final stretches here and kind of head into kicking off the 2027 recruiting class. Anyway, all right. For Scott Schrader,
And Crash Collier.
fight on.
Right on. See you next week.